with 9.connects. Thank you very much for joining us here today. You are in the right place if you are here for our webinar in regards to design reuse in Altium Designer. We're going to be covering the topics of snippets and device sheets. All right, so I'm going to jump out of our screen over here and jump right into Altium Designer. So I don't actually have any PowerPoint presentations for this today. This is just going to be a good old-fashioned tour of Altium Designer itself. And again, we're going to look at the device sheets, we're going to look at the snippets, and along the way, maybe a couple of other things that you may have not known about, or things that you've kind of looked at but don't remember using them, because there's a lot of features and capabilities in the tool, so we'll take it from there. So let me jump over here to this other project. In fact, we just started off with this one right here. What I'm going to show you is a project that we actually did here at 9.connects. As we've mentioned many times before, we've been working on a 3-day PCB training class, the PCB fundamentals, and we figured that we needed an example for our manual and for our exercises, so we did indeed come up with one of our own over here. So what we decided to do is take the Mega 2560 board, and we decided to create a rangefinder that could be attached on top of this board. So this board over here is based on an Arduino schematic. If you're familiar with Arduino, it was a system that was set up actually in Italy, and it was created for those artists and those people who are not really engineering savvy. They were artists, but they wanted to use electronics into their design. So they came up with this really great way of being able to add these things on into their products and their works without having to become basically electrical engineers. And it's really found its way the world over. And so we basically took this board that, again, was from the original Arduino spec. We took this, the company called Inland made this thing. It's only for like $10. And we created our own board to go on top of it. So it's called a rangefinder. So what I've done over here is, just for those people who are somewhat new to Altium, what I've done is I've jumped into the PCB dock and I've hit the 3 key. I'm already in the 3D mode over here. So this is what the top would look like. And this would just basically be plugged into this card over here, which has the microprocessor in it. What we did for these schematics is we basically put together a display along with our finder itself, and then on the second page we set up the pins for the actual connectivity. So I just want to give you a brief overview of the project that we're working on and how this is going to lead us into things like device sheets. So for example, one of the things that we had to spend quite a bit of time on when we did this project were the 6 pins themselves, or the 6 connectors themselves. So if we go back over here and take a look at this, there are actually 7 of them. We didn't use the last 7, this last connector here, because it would have gotten in the way of the actual component for the rangefinder itself. But there are 6 other ones over here. And the way they position them, and even the call-outs that you need to use in terms of allowing this to stack as a daughter card, are somewhat specific. There's a little bit of flexibility with it, but we obviously had to have the placement correct. We wanted to make sure that we could actually communicate with this particular microcontroller. So as a result of that, we spent some time creating each one of these connectors over here. And if we were to ever want to make another board, let's say not just a rangefinder, but a temperature finder or something else we want to connect in here, this is a really useful thing to have or use again. We'd want to use this again. And that's what leads us to the concept of design reuse. So in Altium Designer, there's 2 ways to do it. We can do it on a sheet level, or we can do it on a snippets level. And what I'm going to show you first are what they call the device sheets. And there's actually 2 ways to create a device sheet. And the first way I'm going to show you is kind of a brute force, behind the Altium scenes way of doing it. And then the second one I'll show you within Altium. But I think the second way will make more sense once I kind of go through the motions of it. So if I'm going through a project and I'm saying, you know what, I really like to have this as a device sheet. In fact, I'm going to hit the letters VD, so that's view document, so we can see this whole thing. But I want this whole sheet to become something that's reusable for my colleagues later on, or for myself later on. I can do that. But for me to do that, I'm going to actually jump into the operating system and go to the directory and set up a few things. So I'm going to right-click on any one of the documents that I have here in the PRJ PCB, and I'm going to go into Explore. So I'll just bring it up for me automatically. And I'll drag this up from my other screen here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually reuse actually, let's go up one here, directory. That's the original rangefinder. And what I'm looking for there is the connectivity 6-pin Arduino. This is the one that I want to make into a device sheet. So I'm going to do a Control-C to copy it. And then what I'm going to do in this demo folder here is I'm going to create just a new folder, and I'm just going to call it device sheets, because I just want to show you how easy it is to create this folder to save these sheets. And of course, you could do this on your network drive as well. Now I've got this available in this thing called Device Sheets. I got to let Altium know that I have this thing called Device Sheets that they can use as Device Sheets in my design, so I can make reuse of this again and again in other projects. So I'm going to minimize this here for now, and I'm going to jump back into Altium. So to inform Altium of its existence, I need to go into the DXP Preferences. So I'm jumping in the DXP Preferences. I'm kind of already there. You can see it's under Data Management and under Device Sheets over here. And you can see that there's some that are already set up. One of them is the default that Altium's always going to provide you. So it's in Altium, and of course I just recently downloaded. This is 8017. In its library, they have something called Device Sheets, but there's actually nothing that they store in there. They just kind of create this for the user. And then a really great example that Altium provides, so if you want to play with this later on, you say this is kind of neat, take a look at the Bluetooth Sentinel example that they give you in the examples directory that Altium provides you, because in addition to the project itself, it also has something called Managed Sheets. And these Managed Sheets allow you to basically take the design as it stands, and you can convert between the device sheets and back to regular sheet symbols and vice versa there. So it's something that you can definitely play with. In our case here, I'm going to add our device folder just to show you how easy it is to do. So I'm going to click on Add here. I'm going to go into this PC. I've been working in my Downloads directory, and I'm going to go into Design Reuse Device Sheets. I'm going to press OK. Now it does ask for subfolders. If I had to set up subfolders, I can. I don't have it, obviously, because I just have one project in there. But I can turn that on, and it will traverse multiple subfolders if I actually set that up accordingly. At the bottom here, I am going to turn these things on because by default they are turned on. So what are these? First and foremost, that if you're going to pull something into your project as a device sheet, it's going to be read-only. And then it'll also show that it is a read-only watermark, and then also the display watermark as well. So there it is. I've now told Altium I have this device sheet. Now, how do I get it into a project? All right. For me to do that, I'm going to show you a blank project that I've got set up right here. So you can see I've already got the schematic sheet set up. I've already got a PCB doc in here. I've got nothing in this project. So I want to bring in this device sheet that I just created. To do that, I need to go into the Place menu, and under the Place menu, I'd say 2/3 down, you go into the device sheet symbol. And when you bring this up over here, you can see all the paths that you have set up for your device sheets. Okay, anything that you've stored in there in terms of an SCHDOC file will be in there. And by the way, it doesn't work for PCB docs, so or libraries. It only works for schematic sheets, as far as I know. So here's the one that we put in here. This is the one that we just added in there. But just to also show you here, this is the one that the Bluetooth Sentinel has set up. Now, I'm not sure why, and I saw this both in Altium 16 and 17, these subfolders are a little cryptic, but if you look over here, you can see these things that Altium has created for that project. So you still can see them. It's just that the file structure is just a little bit odd. But it is there, and you can definitely play with it. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to place one down from here. So I'm just going to grab the oscillator, and I'm going to press OK, and boom, I'm there. And if I zoom this in, you'll see that now I've got this sheet, and it's got the recycle symbol. Now, in terms of this versus a sheet symbol, let me place a sheet symbol for a second here. So here's the sheet symbol, and there's a difference between the two. The sheet symbol represents a document that you already have in your project, whereas this symbol over here, the device symbol, represents one of those things that is in your device sheets folder. Okay, and I'll show you how to convert both of these things here in just a moment. For our purposes right now, I'm going to just delete these, and I'm going to go back into Place, and I'm going to put down the one that we put in our example here. So the device sheet folder, I'm going to click on this one here. It was the 6-pin Arduino. Actually, I should call it the 6-connector Arduino, so bear with me on that faux pas. But there it is. In fact, maybe we'll clean this up once we try to save this locally. Now, I have this in my project, but in order for me to make use of it, I've got to compile the project itself. So in the Projects panel, where it says PRJ PCB, I'm going to right-click and compile it. I do get some error messages on the other page because obviously you don't have things connected up. But if you noticed here on the Projects panel, you'll notice that we now have our device sheet. If I open it up, we can see it. And of course, you now have our watermarks, the recycle representation and the read-only representation. Now that means that all I can do is read-only. I can't move any of these things. I can select them. I can't move them. If I go over here and I try to make any changes to the text, All right, it's just going to ignore it, and it's going to put it back in there. Now, if you have to change the designators later on, Altium does have a provision for this under Tools, under Annotation, and then you'd go to board level annotation. Originally, when device sheets first came out, you couldn't even change the device, any of the designators. They got locked in permanently, and so customers asked Altium for at least that leeway and be able to change the annotations here, and Altium obliged, they gave you that. But nothing else really can be changed here unless you turn off the read-only capabilities of that. Now, let's do that. Let's turn off the read capabilities and see what happens with that. So if I go into DXP Preferences and I go back into Device Sheets, I'm going to turn off the Make Sheets in the project read-only. I am still going to keep the watermark on because I like to know that that's actually something. We're going to play with the sheet symbols and the device symbols here in a moment, so it will help me to distinguish between the two. I'm going to press OK. So you'll now notice that the read-only is off, and now if I sweep over, select these, click and drag, I can move these to my heart's content. But now I've got another problem, and that problem is that if I decide to save this, it's going to save not to my local directory, it's going to save over to the device sheets, and I don't want to do that. Okay? So really what I want to do is I actually want to make this project, or pardon me, this particular sheet, a part of my project. Okay, so maybe an idea we can do here is if we click back onto the top level here, and I delete this, all right, so if I do this and I do a delete, all right, now maybe it will say, I'll save this off, and there it is, so I'll save it off, and then if I do a recompile, the problem is now what's going to happen, let's not do a sheet compile, let's do a project compile, I lose the sheet device. So what I really want to do over here is I want to be able to edit this, I want this to be a part of my project. So how are we going to do this? Okay. Well, the way we're going to do this is we're going to go into our Place menu, and we're going to go into Device Sheets symbol. I'm going to add this back on again. All right, so I've got this here. Now, what I'm going to do differently, though, is I'm going to use a feature that's called Refactor. And what Refactor basically does, it allows me to basically take a copy of the device sheets and bring them locally into my own directory so I can play with them as I see fit. So I'm going to right-click on this device sheet symbol, and when I do, you'll see this thing called Refactor, and it gives me two options. One of the options is to move the subcircuit to a different sheet, which obviously I don't want to do, and I only have one sheet anyways. And the second one is to convert the selected devices to a schematic sheet, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want to turn this into a schematic sheet. So when I select that, it's giving me some options. The first one is just telling me, where do you want to save this? Because obviously I don't want to save this in the device sheets directory. Now I want to save this locally to my own project. And since I'm already in a project over here, it knows exactly the directory it wants to save it to, and that's fine with me. And then if you're in something that's kind of complicated and you want to change this from a device sheet into basically into just a document sheet, then you can actually have Altium help you out with this. And this is for those really complicated hierarchical projects where you've got several levels, and making this change here could impact things down below. In this case here, we're just simply taking the device sheet and converting it over to a schematic sheet. And then I'm going to have it recompile after conversion so that it will immediately show up here in the projects panel. And I'll press OK. All right, so now that I've got that, you'll notice now that the recycle symbol is gone. And if I go back over to my projects panel and I look at our schematic doc here, there's no recycle symbol here. And you'll also notice that the symbol has changed itself. This is now a schematic document. And if I want, I'm going to do a save as here, okay, because we called it 6-pin, so we might as well call it 6-connector Arduino, okay, and we'll save that here as such. And then I'll just do a file save all just so that we can move along on this here. Now that I've got this over here, all right, I can do whatever edits I so see fit with this, and if I make changes and save them, they're obviously going to be saved in my projects directory. Now let's flip this around. I mentioned earlier on when we first started that we can create a device sheet two ways. The first one is just basically copying an SCHDOC file into the appropriate schematic devices folder. The second way we can actually do in Altium Designer. So the second way we can do this is we can basically take this this sheet symbol and turn it into a device sheet. Now, the other thing that might come to your attention is like, well, what if I don't want to do hierarchical design? At this point in time, because this has now been saved to the project, I can delete this. So if I do a function delete at this point, and I do a save, and I do another compile. Well, these things have already been lined up with each other, but because there's no longer a sheet symbol in here, it no longer indents itself. Okay, so that just keep that in mind as well. So now that I've got this in my project, if I want to do flat, I can do flat. If I want to do hierarchical, I can leave it hierarchical. But let's say I was working along and I've got a design here where now it's like, you know, this is really good. I want to add this in as a device sheet. I can certainly do so. But for me to do that, I got to jump to another sheet, and I've got to first do I have to actually add a sheet symbol. Now I could do a place sheet symbol here like such, and then I would have to fill in all these things in here using the designator and the file name and adding in the pins, and that's a lot of hassle. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to use another tool for this. I'm going to go into Place, all right, and actually, pardon me, into Design. And in Design, you'll notice that there's a couple of features down here, but what I'm going to use is Create a Symbol from the sheet. And so when I bring this up, it looks at all of the schematic sheets in this project that I'm currently in. It only sees one of them, which is fine. I'm going to select that, press OK, and boom, it instantly creates everything for me. And that's all fine and dandy because that's exactly what I want. Now from there, I can simply select it, right-click on it, go to Refactor, and I can, again, it asks me if I want to move it to a different sheet, which I don't want to do, or I convert the selected schematic sheet to a device sheet, and that's exactly what I want to do. So we see something very similar to what we saw the last time. Now, up on the top over here, it's asking me which one of the device sheet folders I want to save it in. So I'm going to save it into the one that we created here earlier on. I'm going to press OK. One thing to note, however, is that if you want this to have a different name, that you probably need to remedy earlier on. It does not give you the ability within this particular dialog to change that sheet name. Okay, so just be aware of that. So I am going to press OK. I'm going to obviously keep this new name, 6connector Arduino.sch doc the way it is. And again, they give you all of these different options about, well, if you're going to convert this, there may be some impact on things that are on a lower level if you're using hierarchical design. So why don't we just, you know, we can help you set that up or fix those things for you, or you know, do the administrative work on it. In this case, again, we're just keeping it very simple. We're just saying create the device sheet from the schematic sheet and update only the current sheet symbol. And then after that, we are going to have it compile. So I'll move this down here so you can see what happens of this when I press OK. So Altium has now made this into a device sheet symbol. It has recompiled, so if I go back to my projects panel and I open this up over here, you can see that this is now, again, a new device sheet. Now be careful of this because the SCH doc that I used to have has been now basically moved out of the project and has been copied into my device sheets folder. So if I decide to take this later on and delete it, okay, what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to save this. I'll also save the project over here, but if I recompile it, it now disappears. Okay, so that's just the way you got to think and consider it. Device sheets is one of those things that I recommend that they are left as read-only. And if you do need to make any changes to them, obviously you need to bring them in to your project as an SCHDOC, and you can do it either through the procedures I've shown you, or you can just do a good old-fashioned copy and paste from your device sheets into your project folder, and then make sure that if you're going to add it into your project here, you'd simply right-click here under Project, and you would say Add Existing to the project, and at that point you can add that sheet in. So there's just kind of a primer on using the device sheets in Altium Designer. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to write those down, and we'll take a look at them a little bit here towards the end. Let me jump on to the snippet side of things. So what is a snippet really? Well, snippet is really nothing more than a glorified copy and paste. But the thing is that unlike, let me jump to an example here. Let's bring up this here. If I was to take this, just click down and select on it, and now I've got these things selected and I do a Control-C. Well, if I do a Control-V immediately thereafter, you can see I have a copy of this thing verbatim. I'm going to hit my Escape key here. Now, if I take something up here and I do a Control-C and then, of course, it's Control-V, what I had on here the last time has now disappeared, right? So the copy buffer gets blown away every single time I do another Control-C. So the idea behind the snippet is to allow you to have kind of a permanent copy. And so I brought up the Snippets panel here. Where do you find that? On the bottom right side under System, you'll find the Snippets panel, and you can bring it up. I've populated with a couple of examples already. To add something to the Snippets panel is actually very simple. You just select what you want to put in there. Okay, you sweep over and select it. You right-click to it, and then you simply go to snippets here, and they create snippets from selected objects, and boom, it will ask you which one of these folders you want to put it in. Now, notice something over here. There's an underscore preview. I'm going to talk about this, this residual folder here in just a moment. The one I'm going to put it in is to ones called snippets. All right? And I'm just going to leave the comment here for a moment because I'm going to delete it. So I'm going to press OK. It now gets added in here. If I want to remove it, I can just right-click on it. Either I can place it and it will place it down, or I can delete it. In this case, I'm going to delete it and press yes. Now, one of the biggest problems with snippets in the past, and this was at least, I don't know when they made some changes to this, but when I worked at Altium up until March of 2011, the biggest problem with snippets was that there was no way for you to save them so that you can move them along to the next version. And that was a big problem with it. So people thought snippets were great, but without an ability to cleanly move them from one version to another, people kind of forgot about it. And I myself kind of said, forget it. It's kind of useless because unless I'm doing temporary copy and paste, I didn't find the value out of it. Somewhere along the line, Altium improved this so that now you can actually save this information to one of your directories, and you can move it along to the different versions, which is a really nice feature. And now it's made snippets very powerful as a result of that. So how do I do that? If I right-click on the panel here, I have this option to add. Now, there's a little bit of an odd semantic that's kind of going on here. If I say create new folder, it's basically trying to create a subfolder under my existing folder that I have here. But if I actually want to point it to some place that I have snippets that I want to use, I've actually got to right-click, add, and say snippets folder. And then at that point in time, I just need to navigate it to where that folder is. Now, I do have to create that folder somewhere beforehand, but I can navigate to it, and I can actually tell Altium that, hey, in this folder, I've got some snippets that I want you to use. All right? And so there it is, which is really nice. So obviously, we can take information here. So let me jump on over to this one and just give you another example. Sweep over this, right-click, do a snippets, create snippets from selected objects. I'm going to get connectivity. We'll do that. And I'll also add the comment over here. And of course, if you are planning on using the snippets for both the schematic and the PCB side, you definitely want to make the comments very vivid as to maybe what piece of snippet in terms of your printed circuit board is where it's going to match up with that. So you can definitely put some more comments in there to help along with it. The thumbnails, as you can see, they're really kind of small, and there's no way of really enlarging them. So really you want to lean on those comments if you're going to try to set up something that allows for true reuse on it. But I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to drop this in here. All right. And then to place it down, I'm going to go back over to my schematic here. Okay, and I'm going to right-click, and I'll place it. And there it is on my cursor, and I'll drop it down, and boom, there it is. Okay. So that's all I needed to do in order to put that in. Keep in mind that when you're doing a copy of a snippet, it is verbatim, meaning that whatever was there that you initially selected and copied, that stuff is preserved. Okay? There's one exception to that, and I'll talk about it in the PCB. But generally speaking, any of the information that would belong to these primitives that you selected now gets saved in this snippet over here. And why do I bring that to your attention? Because of the fact of this. I'm going to move this down here for a moment. Okay? And I'm going to click on this one here. Here's another example of a snippet that's perfectly allowable. But in terms of use, I think it would cause more hassle than good. Why is that? Because if I drop this down over here, now in order for me to use this sheet symbol, well, I got to make sure that I have a file called SCHDOC. And let's say I create a file called SCHDOC. Inside of there, I've got to have these harnesses with these names on them. And in addition to that, I've got to make sure I have all the right pins and buses that are associated with all this. So this could be very tricky. So I wouldn't, even though Altium does allow you to, again, copy and paste pretty much anything that's on a schematic or on a PCB, know what you're copying and the ramifications of that over here. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. And by the way, if I delete the snippet here, or I make a change to the snippet over here, it will not propagate or any way impact the snippet that I put down here. It's really a true copy and paste in that sense. So there we go. Sweep over that, and we'll delete out. Let's look on the PCB side of things. So a lot of times what people want to do with snippets, actually let's just do a Control-A, and then we'll just move it that way. So Control-A is to select all, and then I just clicked and dragged to move it. So a lot of people do want to have a schematic portion and a PCB portion to go along with it, and that's perfectly valid, and that certainly would help out tremendously. So let's jump on over to our rangefinder. Okay. And I'm now in 3D mode. I'm going to hit the 2 key to jump back over here. And by the way, you will see a couple of these lines here just because I pulled back all of the polygon pores. But what I want to do here is I want to grab all 6 of these connectors. I also want to grab the board outline, and I want to grab R4 and SW2. The reason I want to do that, if I go back here, is that these are all of my connectors, and then there was the switch, and there was this pull-up over here that we were using for the interrupt. And this would be something I'd want to have again and again every time I make use of this. And by the way, they don't get locked into place either. Once these things have been placed, I can move them around as I see fit. So even though this R4 resistor, let's jump back over here, is in the middle of my current project, this R4 could be easily moved after I paste down the snippet for this. So to grab these things, there's a couple of things we can always do. Obviously, the Shift key is necessary in order to accumulate things, but I'm going to show you a couple of other little tricks over here as well. So I'm going to grab R4 here. Sometimes the LCD monitor doesn't allow me to grab it because it's also here as well, but now it's allowing me to do it. But if I couldn't do it, I could always go into the PCB panel here, go to All Components, and then click on R4. Okay, and then I don't have clear existing on, so let's do that, and then let's go there, and we'll turn off the clear existing at this point, and I'll just scroll this back down. So I have this selected. Now the other thing I need to do is grab the other 6 connectors over here. What I'm going to do is right-click on J4, and I'm going to use a feature called Find Similar Objects, one I think is one of the best options or features that Altium has in its tools. Is very, very useful here. Just a quick recap, what you do is you right-click on a primitive of interest. Altium's going to recognize that primitive. It's going to say, okay, these are the properties of the primitive. In the middle are all the filters that you can use to find other things that are similar to it, and then you can determine whether or not these are pertinent to your search. And in my case here, I want to find all of those connectors that have the prefix JP on it. So I can also use the star. If you're familiar with the asterisk, it's a wildcard. So I'm going to say, okay, anything that begins with JP and then anything thereafter is a wildcard, and I need to change this over to same. I also do not want to clear existing because otherwise I'll have to select R4 again, and I'll press OK. So now I've got these selected. I also want to grab the board outline. So again, I'm going to make use of the Find Similar Objects. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you another really cool feature. At the bottom right-hand corner, there's this thing called selection memory. And you know, if you're afraid that you're going to lose what you've selected here because you spent some time grabbing it, well, you can save that. And so I'm going to press on this button here at the bottom right corner. It's called the selection memory. It looks like an old calculator to me. I'm going to clear the one that I've already got. This is during a prior run that I did here this morning before I got to talk with you guys. And I'm going to click on Store 1. And what it does is it just does nothing more than says, okay, these are the things that you have selected. So if I make the mistake of, oh, I clicked off of it and I lost everything I had selected, I simply go back to the selection memory here, and I can tell it to apply it, and now they're reselected again. Okay, so that's kind of a nice way of doing it. Or if I don't want to worry about these and I got to select a bunch of other things, later on I can go back to the selection memory and I can say, hey, go ahead and apply it and make sure that the clear existing is not turned on. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the line over here, Find Similar Objects, and I'm on the track. So I'm going to basically take all the tracks of that are on the M5, which we call mechanical 5. It's our board shape. I'm going to say, hey, any of the tracks that are on there, I want that as well. I don't want clear existing because I want to accumulate this, and there it is. All right, so now I've got that on here. So I've got my 6 connectors. I got R4. I've got the basically the ring here, and then I'm just going to hold down my Shift key and click on SW2. Now I've got them all. And again, if I want to save this in case I ever had to go back to it, I can just put this Store 2, and you can stomp on these very easily. If it's just really just a temporary concept here. So really nice to have, and of course, you know, it goes along with the PRJ PCB document. So, I'm sorry, it goes along with the PCB document. So if you save this off and you open it up again, these things will be there until you basically clear them out for that particular project and for that particular file. Now, to get this into the snippets, very similar to what we did on the schematic side, I'm going to right-click, okay, anywhere on the board over here, and we are going to, actually, let's go on to one that's selected. Right-click, and there's our snippets there. So then we're going to go to Snippets, and then create snippets from selected objects. Again, it's going to ask me where I want to put this here, and in this case here, I'm going to call this one the Mega 2560, okay, and I'm going to call it 6 connector placement. And just to save on a little time, obviously, again, I should put some better comments in there, but I'm just going to copy this in here. I'm going to save it to the snippets folder. I'm going to press OK, and now it's in there. You can see that this is one that you saw. That again, I was doing some earlier work on this in practice for this webinar, so I have this one here as well. But we're going to use the one I just created. And now I'm going to go over to our PCB demo, .pcb doc, and let's bring back over here our snippets panel. And I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to place the snippet. Now I've noticed something a little bit interesting about this, and what it is that I'm going to put this one up here. This probably was a copy from the last my last run of it, so I'm going to do a delete of that, and we'll move this down over. Actually, let me delete both of these and run that one more time for you. So I'm going to say, let's blow that all away. There it is, and I'm going to right-click, and we'll place this. You'll notice, I don't know if you can see it because I know that the video refresh rate is a little slower with GoToMeeting, but I've noticed that when you do this, Altium kind of jumps out. It like does a zoom out, and then it kind of zooms back in during this process of the placement. Don't move your cursor around. Just let it kind of do it. It's going to get you back to your board, and there it is. So now it's on my cursor, and I drop it down. Now, as I mentioned earlier on before, this concept of snippet does copying of almost everything, but there's one exception to that, and that is the Netlist. So if I go back over to the rangefinder document and I zoom it on in, you will notice here that this pin 1 and pin 2 of JP3 has a net label associated with it. Whereas if I go over to the PCB demo here and I zoom in, it doesn't. Okay? So we have to go back to the method of basically saying, look, I've got a schematic that's got this information. I got this with Netlist information. I have a PCB doc that's got these footprints in it. I want to bring in the Netlist information to it. So how do we do that? So I'm going to go back over here. By the way, just to let you guys know, I'm in this PCB demo.prjpcb. So here's our top sheets. This is what I copied again as a snippet into our design, and then over here on the PCB doc, again, let's do a view fit. This is what I copied in for the snippet as well. So what I want to do is I want to basically marry these two together, get their net list to basically be duplicated on both sides in this project here. So to do that, at this point, I'm going to go into Design, Update, PCB Doc, okay? And you'll notice this thing comes up. So why does it ask us to basically do this here? So it's asking us to automatically create component links. Now, the reason it's asking for that is this thing about unique identifiers. And just a little bit of a background about this. Altium Designer, every time it puts down a primitive, generates a unique identifier every single time for its primitives. Even when you do a copy and paste, it will create a unique identifier. If you go into its properties, you'll find the unique identifier. Now, in a project that we've been working on, let's say, for instance, we worked on a schematic. In the normal progression, we create a schematic, and then we push that information over to the PCB side. Altium does retain the same unique identifier that was used in the schematic symbol for its footprint. Okay? It does not rely on the designators, because designators through annotation can get changed, but the unique identifiers, which nobody else should know about or mess with, they're basically allowing Altium to say, yes, this symbol is associated with this footprint regardless of what the designators are as a result of it. However, when you do a snippet and the snippet is dropped down, it has changed the unique identifiers both on the schematic side and on the PCB side. So in order for Altium to reconnect or to clean up the unique identifier issue over here, it's asking us to do one of two things. It's either we are going to manually relink these things together, or we just let the designators do it for us. So one of the things I got to caution you on is that if you are going to create snippets where you've got a symbol or a schematic representation and you've got its corresponding footprint representations in the PCB, you better make sure that you don't re-annotate your schematics until after you have associated your parts on the schematic side to those on the footprint side, okay? Or you're going to have a big mess on your hands. So just be very aware of that. Now in this case here, these designators match the same ones as the ones on our footprint. So I'm going to say automatically create the links, and it's able to do so. I'll press OK here. And even though there's some errors here, it will allow me to push the netlist over from the schematic side to the PCB side. So I'm going to execute the changes at that point in time. Now, yes, there are a bunch of errors here, so let's temporarily turn those off. I'm going to click on Tools in the top menu. We're going to go to Reset Error Markers. The key thing I wanted to show you is really this. Now JP3 now has its pin 1 and its pin 2, just as I showed you on the rangefinder.pcb doc. If I zoom out, if I do a view fit, I also have some rat's nests over here as well, which is what I would expect. All right. The last thing that I want to bring to your attention here on the snippets is I'm going to bring up another snippet for you to take a look at. If you are going to do this thing where it's like, yeah, this is really cool, I want my schematic and I want my PCB representation, that's great. But what you want to do is just be careful about how you select things on the PCB side. So I'm going to place this one. This is one I actually took from the Bluetooth Sentinel. Okay. And I like it, and I was sloppy with it. And I was sloppy on it for a reason. And again, I'm going to go to Tools, Reset Error Markers at this point in time. The reason I like this one is that if someone had put this amount of time into this, I would not want to have to redo this effort again. So if I'm going to reuse this part and someone's done all these resistors, I'd certainly like to have this as not only a snippet on the PCB side, but its representation on the schematic side as well. But what you also see here is a lot of little fragments that I put in here. And these things shouldn't be left in there. So if you are going to do something of this nature, yes, anything that has to be connected between these two, that's perfectly fine. But anything that's probably extraneous or is leaving messy residues of this nature, you want to make sure you clean those things up before you make them into a snippet. And it's easy enough to do if you really wanted, obviously in a project itself, there's a lot of stuff going on around it. But what you can do is you can just simply open up a file, new PCB doc, and just copy and paste this in there, and then just simply clean up what you don't want over there, and then make that the snippet itself. Okay. So that hopefully is a good overview of the snippets. Again, because Altium added the ability to save these things and that you can move them along to another directory, or pardon me, another version of Altium, you can certainly do that. It makes them very powerful. And one last thing as well, and let me jump back over here to this. Because these things get saved in a directory that we can point it to, we can also make modifications to these snippets later on. Now again, if we make those modifications here, it's not going to impact anything we've already done. But just to give you an idea about that, let me bring back up my Windows Explorer here. Okay, and I'm going to jump into Device Sheets. And you can, not Device Sheets, pardon me, Snippets folder here. And you can see in the Snippets folder a couple of things like the thumbnails that Altium automatically creates. But you'll also notice the PRJ PCB doc and the SCHDOC doc. That means that what Altium is doing is that when we save this as a snippet, what it's really doing in the background is it's creating an SCH doc and then dumping whatever primitives that we had copied into this document. Okay, so that's what it's doing. And so later on, if you realize, oh, you know what, this is a mess, or there's something missing from this, you can actually go into this thing and make a change to it. And again, Altium will probably not update its thumbprint, not that you can really see it anyways. And then any future use of it, it will have what you've fixed in it, but anything that already exists will not have those fixes to it. So there's no refresh or update to it. Again, it's just really just taking primitives, saving them off on a sheet, and then Altium just taking a copy of those primitives off a sheet and dumping them into your design. So that's how the snippet folders work. So with that, what I'd like to do now is turn the comm over to my colleague, Christopher Che, who will talk to you here for a couple minutes.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. For those of you that are attending this webinar in this joyous holiday time, thank you very much. So why are you here today? The topics of this nature are important to you. And the tool expertise, such as Altium Designer, which is a very complex tool, is not easily communicated. And by the way, we are not directly associated with Altium whatsoever. We're a service provider, but we have expertise. Our team is, has been employees of Altium Designer in the past, and they have taught, and we're support staff, and so we have that technology, the knowledge built in. We have delivered well over 40 plus technical webinars such as this, and a dozen or more are related specifically to Altium Designer. We're doing one for Altium Designer today, and some of you are non-Altium Designer tool users. I'm curious as to why you're attending, but the rest of the time we cover topics that are non-related to Altium, but just technical in general, like high-speed design, deep dive on different topics like power supply, switching power supply, and things like that. So we believe the processes affect our ability to design, and Altium Designer does it's not a point tool, even though it can be construed as a point tool, but it really does provide processes that includes, the design process, and we're here to help. And so Paul, if you would skip over to the next slide. So PCB knowledge is what we sell. That's who we are. And we've been in business since 2010 as Altium reseller, and since Altium reseller network is gone, they actually gone direct. We retain a dozen plus folks with the Altium expertise. And but however, that's not the only thing we support. I mean, we understand PCB design at its core, and our technical staff has not only taught but also designed PCB and done electrical design for all those years. So we are dedicated to training, coaching, consulting, design, and layout of printed circuit board. Because we believe that PCB is a medium of mediums, and in today's electronics, you can't find just about any electronics without PCB, and we believe that just permeates all throughout the electronics world. And you know, we provide training, and we used to be Altium's exclusive trainer for several years, and we parted ways. We continued on. In fact, we decided to rewrite the material from scratch just because we found to be lacking and whatnot. So our instructors rewrote the material from scratch, and so we now deliver Altium Designer Bootcamp introduction training as well as the advanced topic called Spec Ops. And lastly, Paul just mentioned earlier that we developed PCB Fundamentals course, 3-day course, that really highlights understanding the entire process. And what we find is nowadays, most of the companies are not sticking with a specialist when it comes to PCB design. They're actually enforcing EEs and draftsmen to get into PCB design as well as other functions. And those folks are finding they really need to understand the PCB process, and we have that. So besides that, we provide coaching, and this is where something like what we're just doing today comes in handy. Of course, it would be a lot more useful if it was a one-on-one and you can ask specific questions related to your design, your processes. And someone like Paul could come along and provide you that expert coaching. And we do this through our coaching consulting service. And you think of it as a red phone service. When you're really jammed up and you need some help at last minute, you got to release your design, and you don't know where to turn to. And not only relate to Altium Designer, we can coach on manufacturing process, TFM, documentation, library methodology, and then lastly, we also have expertise in the areas of high-speed power, RF, including high-end simulation tool expertise such as HFSS, from Biansoft and Hyperlinks and related. And beyond that, we provide consulting. And this is where we come along and consult you on your design practice, circuit, the areas where you're not strong in or areas you're getting into that's new to you. And, we also provide design review, peer review. And so all aspects of engineering help, and we provide that. And we'll come along to get your job done.